to bring some kind of control to the self-generated is to have a critique of it, is to develop some kind of, call it new critique if you like, but there has to be a kind of interrogation in order to be able to just make those decisions that even can convert the self-generated into something that's buildable even. So there's a necessity to develop these
there's an idea that
new modes of interrogation, I guess.
There's probably a contemporary idea that the critical and the creative are two separate streams that somehow they're two separate disciplines.
Is this as evidenced by the mute, the creative no longer speaks? Is that?
Yeah.
The sort of gesture versus.
Yeah, or that we refer to architecture really in kind of autistic terms. That they're isolated.
Not artistic.
No, like autistic. Autistic. Which is caught in itself. It follows its own rules and is isolated from a broader culture. But it sounds like that the ARM would argue that architecture has to operate within culture, and that architecture is a critical
even
act.
if we are a little autistic.
Well, we're somewhere on the autistic
We're fighting
spectrum.
it. We've had therapy. Things are getting better.
It's too late. If you're diagnosed late, then that's it. It's
all
too
over.
lait. It's all over.
Late.
You've got to be diagnosed
Can you treat
early.
with drugs?
As we've tried.
I think that's it absolutely has to exist in the social, political, whatever context, and be active in it, critique it, cop the hellfire or whatever. I think that's the best. That's the best place when architecture is neither, mute and just a sort of a false god in a way, but then also it's neither complicit. Somehow it's trying to find the intellectual explosion within the right context, within the active context.
Well, with that in mind, I wonder if we could talk a little bit about the Australian context, and maybe if we start with sorry, mate, and what we do in the Australian context, because the ARM's had engagement with the Australian context over a long period. Can we talk a little bit about how that
Early on, I think our response to the thinking of the Australian architecture, which we inherited from, I suppose, the turn of the 19th century, 20th century, was veneer and just an idea of sort of nationalistic Australian architecture. Probably in the 50s, 60s, 70s, we had a much more self-conscious sense of and quite a spread of work there through to, I guess we'll obviously get into Peter Corrigan and St. Glenn Murcott is probably to mid-70s to late 70s thematics about, the land on the one hand, Murcott, and the suburbs and the sort of aesthetic, alternative aesthetic, or anti-aesthetic almost, of the suburban city culture versus the kind of romanticised landscape idea of Murcott. Those two things, we inherited all of that, and probably our view in relation to the copy, for instance, was to sidestep a little of those potentially stereotyping outcomes.
And look more generally at an architecture which inherits, or therefore the whole idea of the copy, the translation, the interrogation, the exegetical, and therefore techniques of the found object, say, and the application of techniques to transpose those into something that we could see as local. So we were probably searching.
I think we were looking
vigorously searching
and different agendas rather than it be kind of the prospect. Australian landscape painting transferred into architecture. That's the bush or the suburb, and there's sort of almost landscapes. We were looking at, I think, what Australian intellectuals, if they're yeah, who had issues, had agendas. We were looking at those sort of agendas.
The fringe, like
Yeah.
being on the edge of.
So and selecting out
intellectual agenda.
characteristics of that, of the Australian experience, and then pushing them. So like the idea of the copy is, you know, it's kind of huge in colonial culture, and therefore we choose that as a proposition and then experiment with that architecturally. The idea of the fringe, the idea of the road, the idea of the, you know, not the suburb as a figurative thing, but as an experience, as a sort of, you know, the strip shop, the roadhouse, all of those sort of typologies that exist become explorative and intellectual things. So and then also there's even the iconoclasm. There's a sort of make do, all of those sort of bush intellectual, self-taught intellectual, distant intellectual, all of those sorts of things to try
And therefore the slightly malapropic?
Yeah, absolutely malapropic, slightly. There's a great review of, gosh, I can't remember the name, of a 19th century architect in Hobart, and the caption on one of the works in this review is, "Charming but untutored." And the building is a very simple shed with these gross, you know, labels on it.
That'd be a great tag. Charming but untutored.
Talk to me,
Mum.
Talk to me.
Yeah, talk to
Charming but untutored.
And we probably held up that banner as maybe somewhat ironically. A sort of classic little example was the Axis building, part of the National Museum, which has a kind of version of Villa Savoy, but as a black building. But our version of the rooftop sort of scalloping element, which we noticed in a Italian magazine, in an article on Le Corbusier, of course, that they'd printed Villa Savoy back to front, which is quite a subtle thing, but it's noticeable if you notice that kind of thing. The version of Villa Savoy that we built at the National Museum was back to front. So the untutored but
Charming.
we're the
right,
idiots,
didn't I?
you know.
What are you
Of
laughing
course,
at?
We're the idiots. We built it back to front. Only we did do it knowingly.
Yeah.
So I guess there is some of that kind of reflecting dilemma about the erudite, particularly on the fringe. So there is a bit of a self-conscious quality, but without being, without turning it into either a single mannerism or a kind of nationalism. We were hoping to avoid both of those.
Kind of the love of the floor, isn't it? Like the flawed, love of the flawed. That's the painters of the early modernists in Australia. They copied the work from books, and unfortunately the
it was
printing
quite good. But
just was nearly all brown because the printing technology wasn't very good. So.
yeah, so the idea of looking at how things are disseminated, such as that example, we got it wrong because the photograph was printed wrong in an Italian magazine, which we would regard as an authority.
So it's a bit like
and
Australia's first architect was here because he was a forger. Yeah. So he's here because he's copying.
Indeed.
He's here because he's copying inappropriately.
And
because he was really good at it.
But he was
He was very good at
he
it.
was charming and tutored.
He was bad at forging the money, but maybe he was good enough to forge buildings.
This is green.
Yeah, well, he was
a forger.
Czechs.
Czech.
You know, his family company went broke, so he had to make up the difference.
Signing daddies.
There was an agenda running through all that too about related to cultural cringe. You know, there was also that still, you know, very strong idea of, you know, that you had to go to, you know, America or England to the AA to actually ever be any good and then come back, or not come back.
Yeah, I mean,
And
the office.
that was a bit of a thread of that ran through some of that work too.
The office not only,
Yeah.
you'd have to say on that, the office not only was about the production of work, but it was also about advocacy and, you know, education, because we were teaching, and, you know, being active within the profession and all that that sort of thing, to shift that. And one of the things was that thing that everybody, all the best students always left. And these universities encouraged them, go, it's horrible here, it's hopeless, couldn't possibly do any good work here. Go to the UK, go to the US. We actively tried to scuttle anybody who went and discourage them and, you know, drummed them out of the country if they went.
Don't come back.
Yeah, it was.
If you leave, don't come back because we're waiting.
That's right. And when they did come back, we'd give them a grilling. Ask Hank and Julie.
Yeah.
But that issue was about trying to recognise that no matter where you are, you've got to address the issues of architecture, and why not do it here? So it was a kind of advocacy thing that.
But that happens here. Like, you know, Perth, you were saying earlier, you know, Perth had these kind of gung-ho students. They all came here.
Still in this
They're
office.
still here. Like, they came and they never went back.
Yeah, cut that.
You know.
Cut that.
Or, for example, RMIT, which was all Perth
Yeah.
staff, were all from Perth.
Yeah.
Partly out of that generation.
We're probably not really qualified to talk about that.
That's right. That's maybe I want to maybe just go back a little bit to earlier conversation and to some of your earlier words. This is from the editorial of Transition, Volume 1, Number 1. Change is a different affair. Frames of reference shift periodically. Theoretically, they shift continually. There's a little bit of poetry here.
Those are the days.
This is iterative and inevitable and measurable, the ever-present, but it is not progress. Is there progress in architecture? In the curve?
I don't know what progress means.
That's the answer.
Well, do you know what? I never know. I mean, I kind of like, you know, that penicillin is progress, isn't it? I don't know what it means in architecture.
Do you mean
Well,
is it continuing to evolve?
Does you know? There's the idea that the world gets better.
Sewage.
Yeah.
The introduction,
Yeah.
the invention of sewage systems that's progress.
That's progress.
City changing
Changes.
progress. You know, like cities rapidly change when you got water supply and sewage. I don't know what it means architecturally. You can
Elevators.
You can build, you know, big buildings that don't fall down.
So what does sustainability have to do with architecture? For example, like sustainability is, you know, obviously, you know, de rigueur now for architecture or for buildings. Does it relate to the progress of architecture itself?
I always think of
Or
it
is
as good
architecture
citizenship,
something-
isn't it? It's
Yeah.
kind of, well, I mean, it's like technology changes the manifestation. You know, the invention of glass radically changed how buildings could be made. And then in the, late 19th century, early 20th century, that I think it was that huge sheets of glass could be made. That again radically changed it. But sustainability is like, you know, your buildings have to stand up. It's like, isn't it? It's not.
the new
It's not a.
version of that. Is it?
It's not a driver of the cultural act of. Not to me. I don't know. Like something you have to get right. Which means, like you have to make your buildings work properly. There's a whole lot of conjecture
having the
about
dummies in the right place.
What does sustainability mean, isn't it? There's a whole argument about now, you know, the star ratings, that they don't even work. They actually are worse than you designing the buildings and measuring their energy use and all that sort of thing. Whereas the star rating is actually producing buildings that operate worse than that, just because of the imperfection in the rating systems.
I mean, if you're really asking, is it a, I mean, it could be a source, you know, for architectural exploration. I mean, it isn't particularly for us, I don't think. But nevertheless, it's not like saying it's not important. It's just saying it's something.
A lot of the stuff that we do,
Yeah.
I mean, has got, you know, we've got good engineers, we've got good mechanical engineers, we've got good acousticians, and it's just, you know, it's got things in it that are meeting sustainable goals, but it's not the driver of it.
I mean, it could be. I mean, someone could decide to make it that. But I mean, there's been a bit of an early and I think easy tendency to use, you know, symbolism of sustainability as a substitute for actual sustainability. And I it's not good to confuse those things, I don't think.
I do
Yeah.
like those things on top of the CH2. I mean, they're not turned on